Asovanode, mia asovanode, asone daikai, mia ratatavoke. Meshinavukaya, meha vismayona, mayona, ekavi, hakoa kipontoi.
In my own personal view, the two most extreme forms of language on planet Earth in the present moment are code and Icaros. I use the word code here in the most general sense as a term to describe all of the various linguistic processes and computational significations that operate the technological architecture of the contemporary global economy. And then Icaros, which are the sacred songs of the shamans in the Amazon jungle. Songs that are specially used in ceremonial settings when under the influence of the psychedelic plant medicine ayahuasca. If the limit of language is, as Ludwig Wittgenstein once said, the very limit of our world, then these two linguistic processes are like the opposing goalposts of human language as such. Indeed, I would go as far to say that all language currently falls somewhere in between these two extremities. Code in all of its various operating systems is the language that effectively runs the planetary technological apparatus, whether it be social media, the military-industrial complex, or the various supply chains that have come to define the global consumer system as we now know it. Code is without question the basic language that organizes and operates the 21st century globalized world. And the current structure of code, whether we are conscious of it or not, is ultimately based upon a hyper-utilitarian, capitalist mathematical logic that seeks to progressively incorporate the entirety of human experience into its operative logic. To describe the basic action or movement, code is a language that, quote-unquote, draws in. That is to say, the ultimate goal of code is to take everything and anything, life itself, into its own linguistic horizon. In its constant action of radical reduction, of continually flattening the potential array of human experience into formal mathematical abstraction, code draws human life into itself and recreates it as a series of technological objects or commands within its own virtual system. The Italian philosopher Franco Barati, also one of the most eloquent critics of neoliberal globalization and its various technologies, speaks about code in the following passage. Quote, "Language has infinite potency, but the exercise of language happens in finite conditions of history and existence. Thanks to the establishment of a limit, the world comes to exist as a world of language. Grammar, logic, and ethics are all based upon the imposition of a limit. Code is a limited exercise of language and, simultaneously, is the imposition of a performing and productive limit. Limits can be productive, but outside of the space of limitation, infinite possibilities of language persist immeasurably. Code implies a syntactic exactness of linguistic signs, connection, compatibility and consistency, and syntactic exactness are the conditions of code's operational functionality. Code is language in debt." What Barati is saying in the above passage, that, quote, code is language in debt, unquote, is simply a statement that code, as it currently exists as a faithful servant to globalization, how it helps impose a series of limitations upon human subjectivity as we are progressively made to exist within certain technological, political, and even now pharmacological confines. It has no real way to access what could possibly exist beyond its own linguistic capacities. Capacities that it simultaneously operates within and creates. In other words, even as code sterilizes and codifies human experience, not to mention creating a massive global surveillance state in the process, it actually denies existence to anything that it cannot incorporate into itself. This is why, on a very simple level, we sometimes feel a weird sensation about friends or family who don't use social media. We sometimes feel as if they almost don't exist anymore because they fail to adequately represent themselves within the technological horizon. So code is indeed language in debt. It is a language that now owes its services to its globalized masters. Icaros, on the extreme other end of language and radically opposed to the basic operation of code, do not function simply as unique songs in a unique indigenous tradition. The purpose of an Icaro is not simply for the sake of singing in a spiritual context, like what we find in the Bhakti yoga tradition or in the sublime chants of the Gregorian monks. Icaros also function in another critical way. They act almost as kind of a linguistic switch key, a spiritual technique that facilitates an opening for the individual under the influence of ayahuasca to encounter different dimensions of space and time. The skilled and experienced shaman, the shaman who has total confidence in the power of his own linguistic capacities to shape and affect reality, uses the Icaro as a tool for his patients, not just to spiritually heal them or to cure a physical ailment, but more precisely to help push them through the imposed limits of language itself, towards a new spiritual terrain, a terrain where strange visions and new depths of emotional experience are revealed. So whereas code is a language that quote-unquote draws in, whereas code is a language that is used to draw human subjectivity into its own realm of formal mathematical abstract relations, Icaros are a form of language that rather quote-unquote push out. That is to say, Icaros push us over the very limit of the linguistic horizon and into the domain of otherness. The American ethnobotanist and cultural critic Terence McKenna echoes this point in his various speculations about the intersection of language, consciousness, and ayahuasca. To quote McKenna at length, "The experience induced by ayahuasca includes extremely rich tapestries of visual hallucination that are particularly susceptible to being driven and directed by sound, especially vocally produced sound. Consequently, one of the legacies of the ayahuasca-using culture is a large repository of Icaros, or magical songs. The effectiveness, sophistication, and dedication of an ayahuasquero is predicated upon how many magical songs he or she has effectively memorized. In the actual curing sessions, both patient and healer ingest ayahuasca, and the singing of the magical songs is a shared experience that is largely visual. My own experience among the mestizo populations of the Amazon convinced me that the long-term effect of ayahuasca use is an extraordinary state of health and integration. Ayahuasqueros use sound and suggestion to direct healing energy into parts of the body and unexamined aspects of an individual's personal history where psychic tension has come to rest. Often these methods exhibit startling parallels to the techniques of modern psychotherapy. At other times they seem to represent an understanding of possibilities and energies still unrecognized by Western theories of healing. Most interesting from the point of view of the arguments made in this book are the persistent rumors of states of group mind telepathy. Our history of skepticism and empiricism would have us dismiss such claims as impossible, but we should think twice before doing so. The chief lesson to be learned from the psychedelic experience is the degree to which unexamined cultural values and limitations of language had made us the unwitting prisoners of our own assumptions. Even though Code and Icaros could not be more different, could not be more opposed in their basic functionality, Code, a global technological process that continually draws in, Icaros, a highly advanced spiritual technique that rather pushes out. They do have one thing in common at the moment. They are calling human beings and society at large to look beyond themselves. That is to say, both Code and Icaros are both calling for the transformation of humanity in the world in the early decades of the 21st century. Code now calls human beings to look beyond themselves, their history, their values, their very language, so to become one with the computational capitalist planetary system. A call that will become more and more loud and evident in the coming years. New technologies like artificial intelligence, cognitive automation, and virtual reality are all examples of how the global technological system is further encroaching upon the domain of human subjectivity. Our brains, our relationships, and our communities are all now being forcefully penetrated by these new powerful technologies. And this perpetual encroachment will eventually demand, as in the words of the futurist Ray Kurzweil, a moment of singularity, the moment when human beings and computational power merge into some kind of unified existence. Or as others, like the British astrophysicist Stephen Hawking has claimed, this growing technological power will simply eliminate humanity altogether. Icaros, very much like Code, are also calling human beings to look beyond themselves as well. But here, rather than merging our brains and bodies with corporate technology, Icaros are calling us to become more conscious of our own shadow, the fears and traumas that permeate our psyche and the world that we live in. And in that recognition of such darkness, our hope and faith as well. Icaros call humanity to recognize the reality of a living biosphere that surrounds us and the undeniable fact that the universe we live in is permeated with language. I think that you could say, without much exaggeration, that in many ways the future of planet Earth is that of a dramatic choice between Code or Icaros. Will planetary society further submit itself to the march of global capitalism and its accompanying computational language, creating an ecological catastrophe and a dystopian global surveillance state in the process? Or will humanity somehow choose a new direction, to listen to the songs of nature that point to a new reality beyond our current linguistic capacities?